When I was a kid, my grandfather used to tell me about something called the Great Flood of 1916. During the Great Flood, it rained so much in southern Appalachia, particularly in areas like western North Carolina, that it completely decimated the region. The story is still infamous among old-timers as being one of the biggest natural disasters to ever hit the South. It's estimated that around 80 people died. It completely destroyed some towns with stories of whole buildings floating down roadways. It completely reshaped the geography of the land to the point they had to change maps because none of the elevations were correct afterwards. And even 100 years later, it is a story we are still talking about. 7 weeks ago, it rained twice as much.
In September of this year, Appalachia was devastated by Hurricane Helene. The intensity of the flood that occurred over the course of 2 days led to tens of billions of dollars worth of damages, hundreds of thousands of homes damaged, and hundreds of people dead. I myself have friends who lived in the affected region and decided to travel a little over a week after the storm hit to help where I could. While I was there, I decided to document the events and things that I saw for the sake of just getting the word out. It was through this that I was able to meet and even interview several incredible people who were doing a great work in the region. So in this video, I've put together a bit of information gathered online, a series of interviews that I took while I was there, as well as my own personal account of what happened. I'm doing this not only to show a small part of a much greater picture so that their stories aren't forgotten, but also so that the revenue this video makes can go directly to relief efforts in the region. But we'll talk about that later.
Now, there's a couple of things I want to get out of the way right out of the bat. For one, yes, this video is monetized, and on top of that, it has a sponsorship and a merch plug. That is because every dollar that this video makes will be going directly to the relief efforts in Appalachia. That includes the merchandise and that includes the sponsorship. Near the end of the video, I will talk about specifically where that money is going, although if you follow me on social media, you can probably already guess. And the other thing I want to mention is I have met a lot of people who have displayed incredible character over the course of these difficult times, and the links to all of their socials or places you can follow them to be updated on their progress will be in the description. Please show them some love if you can.
By just watching this video, you're generating revenue that will go to people in need. So for one, thank you for that. And also, this video might be terrible. I've been technically filming it over the course of 2 months at this point and don't know if it'll be worth anyone's time. But hopefully it can just be a small something to give back to a community that really needs it. So in whatever way you interact with this video or help out, it means the world, and thank you. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some really cool merch that, for once, isn't going directly to a YouTuber's wallet.
From right now until January the 2nd, I believe, you can get in on the Wendigoon flannel jacket. Not only is the outfit incredibly stylish and very versatile, as you can do things like roll up the sleeves or pop up the collar if you want to be extra terrible, but the inside of the jacket is made of a very plush, high-quality material. And honestly, it's probably like low mid 50s out right now, and this jacket is almost too warm. That's how like cozy the inside of it is. And to make YouTuber merch as low cringe as possible, I put the logo on the inside of the jacket so you have a hidden conspiracy iceberg, as well as on the back of the collar, where it says beneath the surface. And because all of the references are hidden, you can wear it out in public and still feel like a real person. On top of that, we also have this stylish satchel available that can be turned from a single strap satchel into a double strap backpack. Not only is this useful for lugging camera equipment to suspiciously empty riversides, but it's also useful for all of your cryptid hunting needs. The pouches are even labeled with things like survival snacks and maps and ammo.
Also available in the merch drop is this adorable Mothman plush, which, I mean, look how cute he is. He's got little wings and his little arms, like you can pose him and make him sit down and like walk, and he's got his big ears. Isn't this guy just like the best? And we also have a couple sets of cryptid pins, things like the Mothman and Flatwoods Monster, as well as the Wendigo, also known as my logo, as well as some very lame cryptids that still deserve love, like the dodo bird and, of course, the squonk, as ugly as he is. And I also figured while we're at it, might as well make a conspiracy iceberg pin as well.
You can get all of these items for a limited time, and again, all of the profits are going directly to relief efforts in Appalachia. So if you're going to donate, might as well get something for your troubles. Get in on it while you can, and above all else, thank you. Before I get into all of the gritty details, let's hear a word from our sponsor, who I am very thankful for today, as again, all the profits from the sponsor are going directly to the charity, and we couldn't appreciate it enough. So thank you very much to the sponsor, who I, as you can see, am desperately in need of.
Since it seems a lot of you are absolutely terrified by my mustache, let's talk about something we all tend to hate: shaving. According to a recent study, 2/3 of men expect some irritation when they shave. I'm sure most of us have just accepted that we're going to cut our face a little bit or have some skin irritation after we're done. Not to mention, over 2 billion plastic razors enter landfills every year in the US alone. And if you tried to get around the whole disposable plastic razor mindset and use an electric razor like I did, you end up cutting yourself, which I'm not sure if I can show that on YouTube, but I'm leaving it in. I mean, it's showing blood, but it's my blood. I don't know if that counts. But you can change your shaving experience today thanks to today's sponsor, Hinson Shaving. Hinson wants to change shaving not by just giving you a smooth cut, I mean any disposable razor could promise that, but by giving you a skin-friendly cut. And that's incredibly apparent by the Hinson razor. Instead of plastic, the Hinson razor is made out of machined aluminum. On top of that, the razor is built at a 30-degree angle to optimize shaving, and the razor itself only sticks out 0.0013 of an inch past the shave plane. That is less than the thickness of a human hair. Plus, you replace it by just screwing and unscrewing standard double-edged blades that are also recyclable. So you can get refills on your blades pretty easily, and whenever you're done with the blade, it cannot just, wind up in a landfill. Also, Hinson actually cares about making shaving, not miserable. So they've partnered with a medical imaging startup, which allows them to quantify the impact of shaving, and each results indicate that the Hinson razor delivers a significantly lower arrhythmic response, or in other words, razor burn, than that of leading drugstore multi-blade razors. In other words, you can still get a smooth shave that is now skin-friendly and, not miserable. And in a category of products as oversaturated as shaving, it's nice that there's someone who is trying to do it a little different. So if you're looking to get in on the Hinson razor, then there's never been a better time to get in on this offer. It's because right now, if you head to the link in the description at hinsonshaving.com/Wendigoon or use the discount code Wendigoon, you will be able to get a free bottle of shaving cream with your purchase of a Hinson razor. That is right. You don't only get the razor, you get a free bottle of shaving cream as well. What could be better than that? So again, if you're interested, hinsonshaving.com/Wendigoon or discount code Wendigoon to get in on this incredible offer today. Thank you all so much for watching the ad. Thank you so much to Hinson Shaving for sponsoring the video. It really does mean the most. Hope you all check them out. Link is in the description, and we are back to the video.
With all that out of the way, we're going to get into the video. I want to emphasize that we're going to talk about a lot of bad things that happened to a lot of good people very recently. So viewer discretion advised, and in whatever capacity you choose to support, even just by clicking on this, it means a lot. So as always, and I really mean it, thank you for watching.
So to start out, I want to give some stats as to explain why Hurricane Helene was so damaging in the first place. And also, Creepcast merch is available right now for a limited time as well. This merch doesn't go to charity or anything, it just goes to my greed. Hurricane Helene began to form in the Gulf of Mexico in September of 2024. It continued to make its way north, eventually making impact in Florida. As a matter of fact, it is the strongest hurricane on record to hit the Big Bend region of Florida. Hurricane Helene is the deadliest Atlantic hurricane since Hurricane Maria in 2017, and the deadliest hurricane to impact the mainland United States since Katrina. Hurricane Helene would make landfall on September the 26th near Perry, Florida. At that time, it was a Category 4 hurricane, and it had winds exceeding 140 miles per hour. Long before the storm ever made it to the mountains, it was already incredibly dangerous. Not only were there some lives lost within the Florida and coastal regions, but the property damage was massive. However, what happened shortly after Helene made landfall is what made its lasting effects so devastating. See, everyone assumed that, like most hurricanes, it would dissipate before it made any significant distance into the inner United States. Instead, the storm kept moving north. And sure, it was no longer a Category 4 hurricane, and it transferred into a post-tropical cyclone, but nevertheless, it was still incredibly powerful. The storm made its way over Florida, Georgia, South Carolina before eventually stalling over the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina region, with the brunt of the storm making impact in the Appalachian region on September 27th. This is one of the main reasons that the storm was so devastating for the people that live there, because they only had a few hours between hearing the storm will dissipate, like any other tropical storm before it gets to the mainland, to being in the brunt of the impact. And it wouldn't be until September 29th that the storm went away. And you may hear that and think, okay, well, if it's not a hurricane, if it's just a post-tropical cyclone, what is it that made this storm so devastating as opposed to the hundreds of other storms that hit the region? And that is because of rain. And to put it simply, it was a lot of water. The region of East Tennessee and Western North Carolina is colloquially known as the land of lakes and rivers. It is hard to go a few miles through the mountains without running into some kind of stream or reservoir. It's one of the biggest reasons that the wildlife manages to thrive so much within the Appalachians. And while sure, during periods of rainfall, river levels will periodically rise and lower, during Helene, they started rising and then kept going. In some areas, up to 30 inches of rainfall was reported, and in other areas, the river levels rose 19 inches above their expected point. And you may hear that and not think that's a lot, but if a river rises by nearly 2 feet, that changes the entire geography around the river. Because think about it, around the river, you have banks that are covered in trees and topsoil that have never been exposed to water, at least for recorded history. So now, once the river level gets that high, it takes everything on the bank with it. So all of this debris that is now in the water has to have somewhere to go, and in most cases, as we saw in Helene, it just picks up speed and keeps moving down the river. This creates a snowball effect when dirt and rocks start to pick up trees and hillsides, and they keep building momentum, and you effectively have an avalanche. And this kind of thing happened hundreds of times in micro ecosystems all through the mountains over the course of the storm. This is how you get floods that are powerful enough to rip entire houses off of their foundation and carry them over a mountainside. These massive mudslides had the potential, and in some cases did, wipe out entire communities. And as mentioned, a lot of people had no forewarning and can't leave in the middle of the storm, so if your house was in the way of one of these approaching landslides, there's not a lot you could do. Massive rivers like the French Broad or Swannanoa that entire communities are built around, that typically have a depth of 10 to 12 feet, got as high as 24 and 26 feet. The next time you see a river that goes by a town or a house, just imagine what everything would look like if the water was 14 feet higher. Funny enough, the previous record for how deep these rivers got was the Great Flood of 1916 that I mentioned earlier, and pictures have come out of Helene of the water damage level completely surpassing signs meant to show how high the river once got during the Great Flood of 1916. The devastation from Helene was felt in several parts of the country. In Florida, over 1,000 people had to be rescued from the Tampa Bay area. And there were massive power outages throughout Georgia and South Carolina. Across the country, it's estimated that around 4 million people lost power. I'm going to talk about some of the damages to roadways and infrastructure more specifically in a minute. But needless to say, it was extreme. By current estimates, roughly $88 billion in damages were accrued over the course of the storm. And that's not even counting future economic losses because of, how many manufacturing facilities and production points were destroyed. Those estimates for long-term damages can be as high as $250 billion. And of course, the greatest tragedy that has come out of the storm is the heavy death toll that it has acquired as well. By current estimates, and numbers keep getting updated by the day as they keep finding people, but it's currently 232 confirmed dead. And again, these numbers are bodies that have been found or people that have been reported missing. But there are so many communities in the mountains of people who just have a more primitive lifestyle or people who are in poverty who weren't really being kept track of before this happened. And sadly, I think a lot of those people just kind of disappeared. Missing persons numbers are still all over the place. The lowest confirmed numbers I'm seeing out of North Carolina is 26, but some news sources estimate it to be as high as 100. It's one thing to hear numbers like that. They can kind of roll off your back sometimes, just hearing statistics. Tragedies happen every day, right? It doesn't always set in. But I feel like when people started getting videos and pictures of what it looked like on the ground, a lot of the weight of what happens started to set in. Now, there have been several parts of the country that have been horrifically affected by this hurricane. And I don't mean with my account today to diminish any other locations or any other stories that took place. This is simply a telling of what I saw through the limited lens that I had. I myself live in eastern Tennessee, but far enough west that my home wasn't that affected by the storm. However, I have friends who live just outside of Asheville who were severely affected by the storm. So about a week and a half after the storm hit, I drove to North Carolina to try to help where I could. And not that I'm anything special, but I know people in the region and I've got two working hands, right? So I went to the Appalachians of North Carolina, and this is what that was like. So in the initial first couple of days following the storm, it was a madhouse on the ground. For one, communications in the area were a total blackout. So unless you were able to travel to see if someone was okay, you pretty much just had to wait for the phone lines to get back up. Authorities in communities were doing what they could to get rescue efforts going. There's stories of people on Zodiac boats pulling people out of the river who are clinging on to rubble, and stories of helicopter rescues, people going to the tops of mountains to try to evac people before their whole property gets washed away. But because communications and most major roadways were down, most people only had access to their immediate area, and that includes local governments. Most people set about clearing out their own driveways so they can make their way out and see if their neighbor was okay. And sadly, in some cases, their neighbor was not okay. By current estimates, about 126,000 homes were damaged over the course of the storm. And that's everything from a tree falling on a house to entire houses being pulled down a river. And again, the reason that happened is because you effectively had avalanches occurring all over the mountains. According to NPR, over 1,400 landslides occurred over the course of the storm, and that damaged about 6,000 miles of roads and more than 1,000 bridges and culverts. See, anyone who's been in Appalachia for a while can tell you that there are some communities that are entirely relegated to the other side of a bridge. Again, most communities were built around existing waterways, so you'll have a bridge that would go over a river, and then you would have neighborhoods and houses and farms built across the river. But what happened during Helene, because there was so much rubble being pulled down river over the course of the storm, if that rubble impacted a bridge, in most cases, it just took the bridge with it. This is really evident whenever you get to a bridge that wasn't destroyed and you see the sheer amount of trees and debris that is piled up against it. It's no wonder that a smaller bridge wasn't able to withstand it. This made transportation to the area very difficult. So in about the first 72 hours after the storm, four-wheelers and dirt bikes became the main mode of transportation. At least in the area I'm familiar with. I've seen other reports and videos that people were using things like mules and horses to get supplies into other areas in North Carolina and East Tennessee. To jump ahead in the narrative a little bit, while I was there, I conducted several interviews with people who were directly affected by the storm. And one of those people I interviewed is my good friend, Tony Phillips. Tony and I have been great friends for 5 or 6 years at this point, since way back before I started YouTube. Tony lives in Spruce Pine, which was one of the main affected areas through the storm. And Tony was one of the people who, as soon as the storm left, mounted up on a dirt bike and started looking to give help to those who needed it. Tony, hi. If you'd like to introduce yourself to those listening.
What's up, guys? I'm Tony. I'm a resident of Spruce Pine, North Carolina. I've lived here nearly my whole life.
Can you kind of describe at ground zero what that first 48 kind of felt like, or what was going on, what people were doing?
It was weird, man. So, I mean, the first thing that I did was try and game plan like a way to link up with my parents at their house with our boys that, also live in the area. And I was completely blocked in. I would say there was probably anywhere from 10 to 12 trees down on each side of the road from my house. So I was scheming away to get on a motorbike and go check on the boys, but they actually beat me to it. They showed up at my house. They'd cut their way in. Once we linked up, we went and checked on one of our other buddies whose wife was pregnant at the time. Tried to make it to my sister's place in Yancey County up Green Mountain. The bridge at Newdale was closed because there was 3 or 4 houses wadded up underneath it and several propane tanks. They were concerned that the propane tanks might explode, so that obviously didn't work. This was kind of the point where I was like, wow, hey, maybe we should get on the bikes, I'd say about midway through the next day. So the storm hit on a Friday. Saturday afternoon, me and Dad and everybody else had set up like an aid station. We were handing out MREs, and we didn't have like, water bottles, but we have good potable water coming out of the spring box. Any sort of containers that anyone had, we were filling them up with water. We also had the Starlink there, so anyone that was trying to, make phone calls, and it wasn't that like people were quite like starving to death, not quite Mad Max shootouts in the street. Certainly like an unnerving sense of like, wow, this is pretty bad.
How many miles was it you said you put on your dirt bike?
On my rinky dink 2014 CRF 250L, I think it was 1,800 miles in the first week.
Insane. That's like the entire Appalachian Trail.
Yeah, I would say within the first 36 hours was us kind of getting our feet on the ground and getting the aid station set up. And by the first like 48, Eli and I were out making supply runs on the bikes. We put in a lot of work, dude. Like it would be like a full 16 or 18-hour day of riding. Like we would leave, and I mean you were there for some of this. Like we would leave at 6, pull back in at 11:30 or so.
Because you went to some areas that post flood no one had stepped in. To the most you're comfortable, what all did you see doing that?
It was like 1,000-yard stare inducing type shit, man. Not being able to navigate in my own like hometown because the topography, the terrain, and like the landmarks are so just thoroughly destroyed and devastated. It was depressing. I mean, really, there were times that me and Eli would be, riding back, and it would be 10:30 at night, and I'd drive past, some old people's house, and it would just be like cut in half. You can see there's mud like 3 foot up to the windows, and it would bring you to tears, man. It's like the times where you have downtime is where that shit kind of catches up to you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're better off to just like keep your nose, in it and not look up, right?
Yeah.
Like you just keep working and stay busy. Like there's no time to like sit there and ponder and wonder, how many people have got killed. It was tough, man.
There's not time to go through every story I've heard from these guys who were on a dirt bike during the beginning of this, but some of the stories they have told sound like it came out of a war movie. There were some houses up in the mountains that had no communication or way to get out of their house after the storm, so Tony and his friends would be the first people they would run into. So Tony would be asked questions like, is anyone alive? Because they just saw a massive storm hit for 2 days, and now all the roads are gone. There were people just walking around who said they got out just in time only to watch their entire house float down a mountainside. And there were people who lived near rivers who said they could hear screams as the water flowed past. One of the most surreal things, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when I talk about like my experience with it because I saw it firsthand. But one of the weirdest things that happened in the first couple weeks was coming across other groups of people who we've never met before, but they're doing the same thing we're doing. Because you'd be out in the middle of nowhere, like on a dirt bike or on a four-wheeler, just trying to see who needs aid. And then you come across another group of people on dirt bikes or four-wheelers, and then you stop really quick, see if either one needs supplies, what they're short on, where they're located at, if there's anyone who needs picked up somewhere, and then you just leave. You never get their names, probably never see those people again, but there's just an understanding of like we're both doing the same thing. We both got a job to do. I don't know. It's surreal. Now, as you can imagine, as all of this was happening, people from outside of the immediately affected area were trying to get in. But, because the roads don't really exist anymore, that's pretty hard to do. Really, the only method of communication people had from the inside out was Starlink. Starlink being the satellite-based communication system, it was the only method of communication that didn't go down immediately following the storm. So because of that, some images started to come out of the affected region as soon as it happened. My friend Tony had a Starlink at his father's property, so thankfully I was able to stay up to date with what was going on and know that the people I knew in the area were okay, but a lot of people didn't have that luxury, and they just had to wait to hopefully hear from their friends or family in the region. One of the first things people on the outside started to do to get data about the area in question was by air. Because if you can't drive in, at least you can fly over. So as aerial images started to come out of the affected Appalachian region, the damage became pretty evident. It's hard to quantify it for you if you're not familiar with the region, but there are areas that used to be renowned for their beauty and, the grace that nature had in them that now just look like a mud pit. And that's especially haunting considering many of these communities used to have houses and campgrounds that are now completely indistinguishable from a place man never set foot on. So immediately, the crews that are on the ground performing rescue efforts start to run into issues. Even if a lot of the people were being found alive and well, most of them were pretty hungry.
Some people don't realize is where the storm hit Friday morning. A lot of people don't get paid, till Thursday evening or Friday evening, right? So most people had not done their grocery shopping for the week.
Unless you just had a plethora of canned food and MREs ready to go, there wasn't really a way to get anything substantial. Because think about it, even if you have a lot of food stocked up in your refrigerator, the power's out now, so you have a limited amount of time to eat it, if you can even cook it, given that you don't have power. Maybe if you have a gas stove, you're able to light it, but a lot of people didn't have that luxury. And it's not like you can leave your house and go to the grocery store because, for one, the roads are gone, and two, the grocery store is probably also gone. So immediately, people within Appalachia started to set up aid centers. And you may hear that and think that I'm talking fire departments, police stations, and they certainly were as well, but the majority of the aid stations I saw were homes and churches. As soon as enough roadway was cleared to drive a couple miles at a time or even walk, people started going to these community centers and just pooling in whatever resources they had. Things like food, water, generators. And then the people that were running these aid centers were just people in the area. In some cases, people who had also lost everything. One of the people that I met while I was there and was privileged enough to interview was a lady named Suzanne Garland. Her and her husband were running an aid station out of the local Riverside Elementary School. And the Garlands are a perfect example of the kind of people who were running most of these aid stations. They lost their home, they lost their business, they lost their vehicles, and they simply went somewhere where they could be of assistance and started helping. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, we're in the floor, aren't we?
Yeah, it's
all right.
wet. Only because I don't want wet pants.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Me neither. First of all, thank you so much for letting me talk to you. I appreciate it. Do you care to say just what your name is and what it is you're doing here?
My name is Suzanne Garland. So me, my husband, and my mom and my dad own Mountain River Family Campground, which is about a half a mile from here. And it got completely washed away. We evacuated here last Thursday morning at 3 a.m. and we've been here ever since. So over a week we've been living in the parking lot.
I'm very sorry to hear that, of course. I will say it's incredible to see you guys coming out of that and immediately stepping into the aid side of it.
Well, we quickly just realized that nobody was coming and we had lost everything, but we were alive. And once we got out and realized how many people were still trapped and didn't have anything, and elderly people, my husband and I, neither one could just sit still, and he has a very strong servant's heart, and we were like, use us, what can we do? And it's just been nonstop for probably 6 days.
Can you say a little bit about what it is that you guys are doing here at the school?
Well, for the first few days we were just kind of guarding the school. Somehow the doors got unlocked, and I don't know who unlocked them, I swear, but they were unlocked, and so we kept them unlocked because there was a freezer and a refrigerator, so we were trying to get all the food out to give to people, because the first 2-3 days there was nobody. There was no help coming in from anywhere besides just regular civilians who wanted to help. And so, but it was also very hard to get here, and our bridge you could only pass by 4-wheeler, so that was very limiting. So we got all the food out. We were trying to distribute it throughout the community, whoever needed it. Then a few days ago, it's kind of turned into like a supply station because all the other places were getting full. So we had this huge gymnasium. So an awesome team came in 2-3 days ago and hardwired into the electricity with generators. They got into our water system, so we could use lights in the gym and have water. So we got the medical station set up. We have this distribution center now, or supply center, and every day it escalates. Yeah.
It's always something else added onto it. Yeah.
And it just gets bigger and bigger. So
from my understanding, what y'all are doing now, at least somewhat, is providing medical.
There's a huge medical section set up in the gym. So people come here for the medical, and then we also have the overflow of the stock.
Yeah. Just while I was here, I saw a kid come in and saw someone putting bandages on him.
It's bandages, wounds. People can come here they can bring their prescriptions, and the nurses can get those for them.
Wow.
There's tetanus shots because it's really muddy out there, and there's sewage, and people are getting cut, and
I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit again on the timeline and everything, but whenever I went to the area, this is all that I saw. Every person who could help was helping someone else who couldn't help themselves. And then as soon as that person was taken care of, as soon as they and their family were fed, they got in line and started working with everyone else. When I was driving into the area, every church that I came across that wasn't destroyed had been converted into a resource center. As soon as I got into North Carolina, there was a church on the side of the road that underneath the cross that was, in the front yard, they had a sign put up that said, "Help for those that need it." I don't want to emphasize this point yet, because there's going to be more examples before we get there. But I'm so proud to be a mountain boy. Just the amount of courage, of goodness that I saw, of people being who you want them to be, can't be overstated. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As a matter of fact, my friend Tony, who I mentioned earlier, and his sister Sophia set up an aid station at their father's house. Again, their father had Starlink set up, which is how we were able to communicate in the first place. So they set up an aid station in order to pool and hand out resources, and also allow people to hook up to the Starlink and contact friends and family from outside of the community. I think that the emotional and mental well-being of that can't be overstated. Imagine you're hungry and thirsty and don't know what you're going to do, and then all of a sudden you're able to call out and tell your mom that you're okay. Which, credit where it's due, by the way. As soon as people were able to get into the area, Starlink began distributing hundreds of Starlink communication systems all over Appalachia. And then Starlink turned off the subscription requirement. In other words, now people were able to access it for free in order to keep communications going, which was a huge help, and I could say we really appreciated that. So again, just a few days after the storm, there are people going out trying to rescue those who need it and get supplies to those who need it, but they start to run into problems. Sure, there were hundreds of people in the mountains who were willing to help, but not everyone had, hundreds of crates of canned corn or bottled water to just bring to a local church. So some places were kind of running into these distribution issues where, say they've got enough water to hand out, but they don't have any gasoline to hand out for people's generators. And then maybe a couple churches up the pipeline, you have a location with too much gasoline and not enough water, but because they can't travel to each other yet, they're both stuck with the same problem. So people on the ground that were able to communicate started getting word to the outside, and it became apparent that for immediate needs, the only real route of delivery was through air. Now, the majority of this was done through like police departments and government agencies who were able to get, federal groups to come drop in payloads of water, gas, whatever they needed. But a lot of it was also done by just people. For example, my friends who had set up an aid station at 3 Mile needed things like adapters for generators and electronic equipment and things that they didn't have beforehand that they were now unable to travel and get. So we got in touch with a friend who had an airplane and had him throw it to us out of an airplane. Which, a couple of things. For one, even though I wasn't there yet when the airdrop occurred or any of that, I will say, just objectively, is pretty fun. Not that is in any way a proper trade-off for all the bad that happened, but just in a vacuum by itself, that was kind of neat. And the other thing is, you may hear that and think that's such a unique or one-off instance in the midst of this storm, but this kind of thing was happening everywhere. People who had private helicopters were making landings at churches to drop off water and food. Anyone who could get a word out met a lot of people who were really determined to get supplies in. As a matter of fact, a lot of these airdrops were being entirely coordinated by civilians. As a matter of fact, my friend Bryant was one of the people who kind of accidentally wound up being I don't even know what title you would give him, an air resource aid coordinator, I guess. And he's just a guy who has a pilot's license. So, for one, thank you so much for agreeing to interview.
Not a problem.
It means a lot. Why don't you tell us who you are and what it is that you're doing out here?
So my name is Bryant Clays. I'm a flight instructor out of Greensboro, North Carolina. Former military, have some friends and family out here. Was flying in aid packages, and now I'm here on the ground distributing those packages to people who need.
You are not, prior to this event, an aid officer or a care package deliverer.
Not at all.
So how did that come to be?
So as soon as the hurricane hit, the day after, I was trying to find a way to get out here, and all the roads being blocked off, and the only way you could get out here was by airplane. I just happened to have the skill set and the equipment to be able to do that. So all I needed was somewhat decent weather to be able to bring some supplies out here to those in need. The first good weather day, I think, was about 3 days after. I had kind of opened the floor to some of the other instructors that I work with, like, hey, I know some of your families live out here too. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of get together, get some supplies together from local churches, communities, whatever, and we'll fly out because we have airplanes, we have the skill set, let's put it to use. So that's exactly what I did. I was one of the first ones to make runs out here, and then started coordinating with the other flight instructors to take it to different airports, not just Avery County, but to go to Rutherford, to go to Asheville, to go to Foothills, tons of different airports. So we ended up with 8 planes moving probably 5 to 6 flights a day with 300 to 400 pounds per flight.
Man, talk about just like the volume of aid that provides, especially because that was at a point where you couldn't get in. Mm-hmm. Like there was no way to drive in. It literally had to come from the sky to get to people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, all this happened, and you have no experience with running something like this.
Not at all.
Never done anything
just
like
did
this
it on
before.
the fly.
And then I hate you. And then they're like, oh, you've done this before. You know what you're doing. Can you do that again?
Yes.
And you said yes.
I did.
Can you do that a lot of times and delegate it to a lot of different people?
Pretty much. And then it ended up turning into Greensboro Airport becoming a drop-off place for people to take packages, and then just random people with their own airplanes started showing up and asking if we had pilots to fly with them places.
This is pretty much how the first week of the aftermath went. People were out trying to check up on friends and family. There was some small donations coming in, like airdrop. And once some roads started opening up, people started to deliver it, and then it'd get passed down a sort of supply chain to get resources from one place to another. But for the most part, people were just kind of fending for themselves. So on October the 4th, a little over a week after the storm hit, I loaded up and went to go help my friends in Western North Carolina. And help is kind of a strong word. I'm just one guy, and had a camera, but I figured that'd be useful for something, which I don't know. Depending on how this video does, we'll find out. Now, I'm a Tennessee boy, and even though I went to North Carolina, I don't want to oversimplify the damages that happened to Tennessee as well. Western North Carolina certainly got the brunt of the impact, but East Tennessee wasn't doing so hot either. Areas like Knoxville were pretty okay. A lot of places had like power outages for a day, but pretty standard of a heavy rainstorm. But once you got over to like the South Tri-City area, so like south of Johnson City and Bristol and stuff like that, it started to get pretty rough. Like, for example, in Unicoi County, in the town of Irwin, the flooding was so bad that the hospital had to be evacuated, but it was in the midst of the storm and the water level was rising up through the hospital. I think it got all the way up to like the 3rd floor, that they had to bring the patients onto the roof of the hospital and over several days have helicopters evacuate people. So a lot was happening in Tennessee as well. There are a lot of stories that came out of Tennessee. But again, I just had friends who were affected in North Carolina, so that's where I went. Asheville was the biggest city that was directly impacted, but the people that I know who needed help were in the area of Yancey, Mitchell, and Avery County, so that's where I went. About 40 minutes to an hour north of Asheville, or at least 40 minutes to an hour before a biblical flood hit. At the time, it was probably more like a 3-day hike. As mentioned, I-26 and I-40 were pretty decimated. So getting to the area I was trying to get to was a process in itself. A friend of mine had went a day prior, so he was able to relay information to me as to how to get there effectively. But even then, I had to, and I'm not saying this is a good thing. I do not stand by this, and this is a big no-no, kids. But even then, a little over a week out, I had to run a couple roadblocks. I had to go down some closed roads and then find like a back road that connects you over to another road. What normally is like a 2-hour drive became like a 5-hour ordeal. There were several signs that were saying, turn back, do not go to North Carolina. Literally, as I got to Unicoi County, Tennessee, there was a flashing road sign that said no through road to North Carolina, and I simply pretended I was illiterate and kept driving. That's not like a credit to me or anything. I just like excuses to be evil. The majority of back roads were being cleared out by just local people who had chainsaws and a truck. Because again, state road workers were focused on getting major roadways opened up, and who knows how long it would take them to get to every back road or street in the mountains. So the majority of scenic roads I ended up taking were being cleared out by just a group of guys that live there. I ended up taking a route that made me cross the North Carolina border over the top of Roan Mountain. And it was so bizarre. The moment I went over the top of Roan Mountain, it was like a scene change. A weird side note about this storm is that the damage was in the complete discretion of however the water fell. So if you had a mountaintop with a stream running across the top of it, whichever way the water tipped over, that side of the mountain wouldn't be decimated, but the other side would be fine. As a matter of fact, I met several people in scenic North Carolina who went a whole day not even knowing that anything serious had happened, because from their perspective, they were at their house and then a big storm came, and then the next day everything was fine and the phone lines were down. So if they were just staying home that day, they had no clue as to what happened other than maybe a temporary power outage for some. And again, the phones aren't working. So on the Tennessee side of Roan Mountain, it was fine. But as soon as I got to the top, it looked like a bomb went off. The entire mountainside had trees down. At the bottom of every ravine, there was piles of debris 20 feet high. It's heartbreaking to see areas that are so renowned for their beauty now look like a fallout zone. So I continued driving into the state, and as I did, a lot of the reports I was hearing started to make more sense. In the first few days after the storm happened, there were a lot of people, especially online, who were complaining as to why supplies couldn't be delivered in. Like, oh, well, we send, trucks full of food and resources across the country every day. Why is it so hard to get them into that region if some people can theoretically drive their cars through? So many of the roads were like just completely destroyed on one lane of traffic. And there were so many like tight turns and corners you had to take at risk of going over a ravine. I couldn't imagine trying to drive a trailer through that. Now, again, this is like a week after the storm, and there were some people who managed to find other routes, either from the south or west sides of the state, that managed to make their way in. But the closer I got to the affected area, the more I became aware of how extreme the situation was. As mentioned, on the route up, I saw several churches and schools that were providing aid, and I think every car I came across was loaded down with food and water. After getting lost a lot, I made it to my friend Tony's place, which, as I mentioned earlier, they had converted into an aid station. The aid station itself being ran by Tony's sister Sophia and Tony's wife Miranda. And as soon as I got there, it was overwhelming, to say the least. With no exaggeration, there were hundreds of people that were coming through the aid station to get food, water, diapers, toiletries. You've got to realize some of these people lost their entire homes. The clothes they had on their back and maybe their car, if their car was okay, is all that they had. Every kind of person you could imagine was coming through that aid station. Again, the region of Spruce Pine and Banner Elk and a lot of the communities around there are renowned for their beauty and known as these big travel destinations. So a lot of the people, at least in the first few days of the storm who came through the aid station, were tourists who were now stranded. So for most of those people, fixing their problem is pretty easy. Give them gas to drive out of town, give them a couple $100s in case they need to get more gas or need to buy something along the way, and then food to just last through the day. But after those people were taken care of, a lot of the issues were more severe. Food, water, and toiletries were a huge help. And then people who still had their house but the power was out and they just, needed to keep supplies going, generators became a major need. I mean, there were a bunch of people who came through who were thrilled to see we had baby wipes and deodorant, because a lot of these guys hadn't showered in a week. The kind of needs that you don't really think about until you're there and realize, oh yeah, that probably is a problem. And another major thing a lot of people needed was baby supplies. I saw a few families come through that didn't speak English, and my friend Eli speaks Spanish, so he was able to talk to them and translate what they were needing. And it was through him we found out that one of the families who pulled up had a newborn baby in the car, as she had to give birth during the storm. And you'd have a family like that pass through the line, and then you'd have a family right behind them ask if we had any kind of portable toilet or portable shower because their water system was destroyed. That was another major issue that happened. In towns like Spruce Pine and even Asheville, the major metropolitan area of Western North Carolina, the water systems were completely wiped out. To this day, most areas still don't have clean, drinkable water because the flood just completely wiped out water treatment facilities. So now people are entirely reliant on bottled water. So even if your house was okay after the storm, you still probably didn't have anything to drink. And you may be asking, okay, with that number of people coming through your aid station, how were you able to get that many supplies? Well, we knew a lot of people who were business owners in the community who were able to lend supplies like gasoline or toiletries for us to hand out. But then for other stuff, thankfully, some of our friends have connections to the military and government and were able to coordinate new airdrops of whatever we needed. So things like generators were delivered to us on pallets out of Chinook helicopters. Which it was really weird to be at my buddy's place and then we're landing Army helicopters all of a sudden. Truly unprecedented times. Again, similar to the airdrop thing earlier, in a vacuum, if everyone didn't have to suffer and hurt through this, it was kind of cool. That was really one of the most bizarre things about this entire instance, and for the better, it was people helping each other, but it was just watching all of the societal walls and stuff like that kind of break off, and not in a bad way, not to say it was like Mad Max, wanton destruction or anything. It broke off where it needed to. For example, there were a lot of grocery stores or Dollar Generals in the town that were flooded and destroyed. So owners were just telling people, go into the stores, grab up whatever you can, and then take it to an aid station to redistribute. So we're just walking into grocery stores with flashlights and stealing everything. Or like I mentioned with the Chinook, we had like a bunch of rednecks in the mountains that were landing military assets to drop off supplies to people in need. Life is strange. Another example of that is when it comes to security. So this didn't happen at our aid station. I think just because we had so many people around and armed at all points through the day. But at aid stations around us, there seemed to be a theft problem. And you may hear that and be like, what are you talking about? It's an aid station. It's free handouts. Which, yeah, you would think that. But the problem was a lot of these aid stations were also acting as mobile medical clinics. Because think about it. If you're in the affected region and you need insulin, and now the power's out, so you can't refrigerate it, and there's nowhere to go get it, you're in a pretty rough spot. So a lot of these aid stations we were going to would have a doctor on staff who was just writing prescriptions out of like a kitchen. But is there any like medical issues that are a problem constantly? Or?
At first it was oxygen. There was a large demand for oxygen and there was none. I think that's starting to get better. So that's been a big thing.
So there were instances around us of these aid stations being robbed for pharmaceuticals. I don't think it's news to anyone from the region that Appalachia has a little bit of a drug problem. So people who were dependent on that kind of thing weren't exactly willing to set in line and, try to get a doctor to sign off on it. There were a couple instances we heard of aid stations around us being robbed at knife point, and at least one instance of an aid station being robbed at gunpoint as families were there seeking aid. And considering that the local police department was spread thin as is, the sheriff came to us, again at my friend's place, and asked if we would be willing to take rifles and stand guard at a couple local aid stations. Because my friends were trusted in the community and the police couldn't spare the manpower.
There was looting going on. Now, was it fairly isolated? Yes. I can tell you that the looting was enough of a concern that for me and Eli riding around on bikes with food, water, and a few grand in cash, people were pretty desperate. I was carrying the old trusty MP5, right? And I felt completely justified in doing so.
Yes, and who was it, to clarify for the audience, who was it that asked if some of us could show up with rifles and kit at an aid station?
The sheriff.
Yes.
Right.
So we put on kit and stood in front of aid stations and started handing out water and food just so there was a visible deterrent to anyone trying to act a fool. As a matter of fact, right before we got there, a couple people had run up and tried to steal supplies and were making a run for it before they were tackled, and a police officer just so happened to be there, took them to jail. I don't know if the jail was still there, but he took them somewhere. There's a moment where a group of us were walking down the side of the road with rifles, and a police car pulled up, rolled down the window, which in any other scenario, this would become a problem very quickly. But the officer rolled down the window and said, "Do you boys need anything?" And we said, "No, we're going up to the school nearby to pull security." And the officer said, "Thank you boys very much. Let us know if you need anything," and drove off. Again, life is strange. It was also at this aid station that I started to meet some really cool people from all parts of the country. Sure, most of the people who were there helping out were people from the local area, but there were some there from Oklahoma, Virginia, Louisiana, who just came from all parts of the country to try to help where they could. Where all are you guys receiving those supplies from?
Oh my gosh, everywhere. People are either Venmoing people money that can get here to go buy stuff. A lot of people are coming from the eastern part of the state. There's a lot of people coming from Tennessee. So, but what we have seen is a large influx of people from the eastern part of the state, whether it be police departments, civilians, just first responders. Like our Swift Water team a few days ago was Delaware, New Hampshire. Like, it's just, people came from Kentucky, people are coming from Oklahoma. Like, just whoever can get here, I think, is just trying to.
We've got a volunteer working with us right now through the U.S. Veterans Corps. He's all the way from British Columbia, Canada, dude. Like, it's crazy to see where people have come from and how willing they are to to help people they've never met.
One really, really cool group that I met while I was at the aid station was a group called Vets to Drones. Vets to Drones and Chris Lewis, who was there, representing them, is a very cool group that was using drones to survey areas before we sent out people or heavy equipment in the later days of the aftermath, and to just check to see if anyone was up there. They had thermal imaging on cameras to try to see if there were people located at the tops of mountains or at properties we hadn't been to yet. Do you care to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you boys are doing here?
Of course. So I'm Chris Lewis. I'm the founder of the Vets to Drones program. We help veterans learn how to get into the commercial drone industry. We also help them with the recreational therapy, and one of our missions is national disaster response, which is why we're here.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, you guys have brought in like some serious equipment, which goes a long way. One of the biggest issues we're running into is there is no communication, right, anywhere. Like no eyes in the sky, at least none that are talking to us.
Absolutely. So that's why we like to have troops on the ground as early as possible with capable drones. So they're out scouting the area so they can see what's wrong, how do we get through this, where do the chainsaws need to be so we can clear roads, how do we get to people who are in need, using both RGB during the day, thermal at night, and night vision at night as well. So far, we've been the ground crew, the rear command, if you will. We brought a lot of supplies in. We helped establish a base camp, get some Wi-Fi up with Starlink that was donated by Elizabeth City State University. And some of our early crews were out here using Flycart 30s and M30Ts to scout out locations that were cut off and to deliver sensitive supplies to those areas as well.
There's been a ton of people who have absolutely no connection outside. Like they can't get out. Very few people can get in. And it's hard to even know where they're at, with lines being down like they are. So being able to, kind of scout ahead goes a long way. You've worked in disaster situations before, right? How does this compare to some of the others you've come across?
So the terrain, obviously, right? So most of the disasters we respond to are on the coastlines. Gulf Coast, we're in Florida, Georgia, all along Louisiana and Mississippi, Alabama. Everything's flat. It's a completely different terrain schedule, right? During Hurricane Ian, the floodwaters came in. They came in, got sat in the swamps for a while, and then started receding out. And that caused a problem, but once they were out, they were out. Up here in the mountains, floodwaters are moving so quickly and so devastatingly that they're just destroying entire towns. So it's absolutely just unfathomable, the damage that's happened up here based on the amount of water that's come down and the scenes we're seeing from the sky.
Most people just never considered it a possibility, at least to this degree. I mean, sure that you hear about areas or certain hollers flooding or something like that, but to this level, I've never heard of it in my lifetime. I've always heard my grandparents talk about things like, the Great Flood of the 1916, and then this precipitation numbers blew that out of the water. It's absurd. A lot of people just thought something like this can never happen.
This has been a storm that nobody was prepared for. Most people evacuate, come to the mountains to avoid a storm. My family itself has done that in the past. During Hurricane Matthew, we came to the mountains to avoid the floodwaters that were happening in eastern North Carolina. So it's just been absolutely devastating what's happening up here, but we're glad we're out here able to help. And the amount of support we've had from the community, from the veteran network we work with, to get supplies out here and necessary tools to help with the job has been absolutely phenomenal.
It's so weird how it seemed everyone, regardless of what their specialty was, what they were knowledgeable in, was able to use it for something. There were people there who were familiar with meteorology, who were putting together maps based on previous year's rainfall data to see what areas would be the most heavily affected over the course of the storm. And sure enough, most of the time when we checked out those areas, they were the ones that needed help, just going off of old weather charts. It's incredible how everyone was useful in so many unique ways. So over the next few days, I went out with groups of people who were doing aid checks, seeing if anyone needed, any food or water or anything like that, as well as coordinating deliveries for stuff. Because at this point, a lot of the inner roads in North Carolina were opened up. So maybe an aid station says they need this thing. So we put together a little convoy and take it over there. So through that, I was able to see firsthand a lot of the communities and damage that had happened up certain hollers and stuff like that. And needless to say, it was a lot. In a lot of the footage that you're seeing of everything, I made it a point to only record either the environment or the structures or other aid workers. I didn't want to get footage of anyone who was in need of aid because a lot of these people are going through the worst days of their entire life, and the last thing they need is a YouTuber standing over there with an annoying haircut being like, wow, so how does that make you feel? So even though you're not going to see any in this video, you can imagine most of them were rather destitute. One area we went to was a small neighborhood, a patch of maybe 20 houses at the south side of a tight river bend. And again, considering this community was on a river, the water levels got pretty high and a lot of the area around their homes were destroyed, including the road leading into the area. After making contact with them, we found out that during the initial hours of the storm, several people were evacuated by helicopter, but those who chose to not be evacuated were now pretty much stuck up there. Our guys on the motorcycles had went to that area shortly after the storm to get a feeling of what the needs were. So come to find out, a lot of the people didn't want to evacuate, even if their houses were in the immediate danger zone, because they didn't want to leave their animals behind. This was a huge issue during things like Katrina as well. Aid crews won't also let you bring your pets on the helicopter for some reason, I guess. So there were a bunch of people who were refusing evac because, they didn't want to leave their dog behind. So one couple that lived on that street who weren't going to be evac'd started telling people that they can leave their pets with them until this all blows over. So there's one house up here in the middle of an isolated community that had, if I remember right, 20 cats and 15 dogs. So the number one thing they needed was dog and cat food. As you can see from the footage of the damage to the road, yeah, you're not getting a car through that. Another point to emphasize how strong the community in the area is that as we were walking along the destroyed road, at parts that you couldn't navigate it without risking falling into the river, people had spiked down ladders up the sides of hills and then back down on the other side. That way, if someone needs to get in and out, they have a method to get through. And most of these were put up by people I will never meet or know. But there is the satisfaction I get that we were all working on the same side in this. Also, as if things couldn't get any worse, I ran into my arch enemy while I was up there. So as we can clearly see, not even an act of God could destroy kudzu, because as we all know, kudzu is of the devil. I hate it. This road is gone, but that stupid plant refuses to go away. I hate it here. So as we're walking, I'm talking to Bryant about some of the things that he had seen so far in the area. And Bryant was telling me that there are places in the mountains, at least in the first few days of it, when search crews were out. And this is kind of graphic, so viewer discretion, skip ahead if you don't want to hear it. But there are places where you can walk around and you can smell bodies. And I was talking to him and I was like, I don't think I even know what that smells like. Because, why would I, right? I have such a cushy lifestyle. And Bryant was kind of trying to explain to me what it was like. And then as we're walking, we get about a mile up the road and I smell something really strange all at once. And then the moment I do, he turns around and says, that's what it smells like. It's so haunting, right? Like Bryant knew what it was like. He was in Afghanistan. He was in the war, so he had experience with that kind of thing. But to be home, to be in North Carolina and experience that, it's haunting. Now, you may hear that and think, oh, did you come across, someone that had died in the storm? And the answer is no, but we did come across some human bodies. Because what had happened is before the storm hit, there was a cemetery on the side of the river in this community. And the river waters were so intense that it dug up most of the graves. Some caskets that had been there since World War II were now just lying in the middle of the river. And a lot of these coffins were picked up by the waters and then carried until they hit a tree and then just got buried under a bunch of rubble. So you can physically see a coffin in some places that's cracked open, and that's where the smell's coming from. But you're not going to be able to get it out without heavy equipment. Heavy equipment, for one, that is in high demand and low supply at this point. And two, even if you had it, there's no way you're getting it in there with the roads down. So we find the house that needs the dog food. It wasn't hard to find because of all the barking. And then while I'm there, I start to talk to the couple about what the situation's been like. They described to me everything I already said about the helicopters landing and taking people and them agreeing to keep the pets. They said that also on the other side of the river, there is another little community of about 3 different families, that the only way in and out of that was a bridge that is now nowhere to be found. You can see like the place across the river where a bridge used to be, but the bridge itself is like a mile upriver. They explained to me that the people on the other side of the river are now totally isolated. So they set up a metal wire across the river and then got a like inner tube that you would like pull behind a boat, and were using a pulley system to get stuff from their side of the river over to them, which that was working fine until a couple days before we got there. The people I was speaking to told me that the family had come down to the river to wash their clothes in the water because, power's out and they don't have any clean clothes. And that immediately afterwards, they all got incredibly sick. So sick, in fact, that one of the houses on the street had a Starlink connection, but they had to run their limited supply of gasoline on a generator to make it work. But they managed to get a communication through to get these people air evac'd. That's how sick they got. And the reason that happened is because another thing that happened during Hurricane Helene that not a lot of people know about, the water got tainted. The rivers of North Carolina are often renowned for their beauty. This crystal clear water that you can go fishing in or camp next to and have a great time. But when the river waters got that high, it pulled everything from the banks of the river down into it. I've already talked about the damage that the debris had, but the other damage that had is all of the bacteria that are now rampant in the water. Not only because of all of the waste runoff that's now in the rivers, but as I mentioned, water treatment plants were completely destroyed in a lot of places. So the waters that used to be known that you could drink straight out of are now full of things like E. coli and Legionnaire's disease. That's also another point when I talk about, I think the death toll from Helene is sadly much higher than we're kind of giving it credit for right now, because there are a lot of people who may have been in that same circumstance who didn't have a Starlink they were able to hook up and, get a helicopter evacuation through. I think it's going to take some time, but I think maybe not just during the storm itself, but in the effects that followed, I think a lot more people may have lost their life.
Coming months, when they start seeing that people have not paid their cell phone bills or have not paid an electrical bill or something like that, that we're going to start seeing that number kind of creep up.
It's not malicious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not malicious. That's a great way to put it. It's that a lot of these people just haven't been accounted for, and it's not that they were really accounted for before this, right? So there are people who live out here that intentionally live very remote, isolated lives, right? And I respect them for it, honestly.
Sure, but those are the kind of people who don't show up in missing statistics. I mean, you were telling me yourself about when you went out on an expedition, there was this whole community that didn't have mailboxes. They just lived in trailers down by the river, and all that's gone. And then I'm sure places like that don't show up anywhere. It's not like they had a registered address or known ID in the region. They just existed to themselves. I don't think there's a lot of... I don't think, it's not that I don't think they're reporting it. I don't think there is a way to report that kind of thing.
Yeah, they were not accounted for before this.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah. So how are they going to be accounted for it afterwards?
Those people that did struggle with, addiction, struggle with poverty and that sort of thing, those are the ones that are going to we have to make sure they don't get swept under the rug, right? Yeah. They would go out and we would find human remains, and it would be like, yep, we know there's human remains here. And it's like, okay, well, can we recover them? And they're like, well, we can't do that until we have like a mortuary trailer. And it's like, what? you know, what do you mean we can't recover these people? Like,
we have to leave them out to rot until we do protocol. Yeah.
Isaiah, I know that if I was wadded up dead in some brush pile, that you would make sure that I was not.
I'd pull you out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in pieces. I know you would pull me out.
You'd be out. I can't promise in what condition, but yeah.
Just from like a common sense, like dude on the ground perspective, it's like why the hell can't why can't we do something and why won't we do something?
Yeah.
And that kind of proliferates into like, oh, the government's hiding the body count. They're trying to buy up all the land to mine lithium, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And it's like, no, dude, we're just pissed because, you know, the people that lived in a double wide off Cane River, their remains are known, could be recovered, and no one was recovering them at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, later on, they did recover them, right? And I'm appreciative of that. And I understand that it's like kind of just the score, right? Where you've got to go through with these procedures and protocols to do some of this stuff. But it was certainly frustrating for a time. And I know that I expressed those frustrations to you while I was experiencing them.
Understandably so, I would argue. So while I'm standing there talking to this couple, I start to ask about the destroyed cemetery. And they explain that the cemetery is one that has just been there since like the 1940s and it's just put together by people in the community. This is a pretty common thing up in the mountains. If you have these small neighborhoods or groups of people up a holler, a lot of people will get everything from married to buried there. So a lot of the bodies that were buried there were, you know, the local community members' parents or aunts and uncles. And the entire time I was talking to this couple, they were very to themselves, sort of, right? They didn't want to take handouts from anyone. We had to convince them to take the dog food without paying us. They were very adamant that, now we're not looking for a handout. We want to make an honest living, whatever, you know, being very Southern about the whole thing. And I just made the passing mention of we have some people that have military assets. We have some connections to government. In the future, if possible, I would really like if we could put those bodies back in the ground. And the moment I suggested that, the wife started crying and said thank you. I forget how grateful I should be sometimes, I guess. And seeing her get so emotional over just the idea of like, you know, getting to bury her family again so they're not rotting in their front yard, how much that would mean to them. Like I said, this whole thing, it was pretty rough. But I kid you not, as I am standing there talking to this woman, and this is the reason that I have neglected to mention what the name of this community is or what street it's on or what like part of the river it's in or whatever. As I'm standing here talking to this woman, while I was also talking to the couple, they had explained that yesterday they finished cutting a trail through the woods to get over to the street. So now you can get four-wheelers in and out of the region, which is really good. That didn't do a lot for them because I asked if they had a four-wheeler and he said, yeah, it's right there. And he points and I see a tire sticking up out of the river. So not a lot of good that does for them, but we can get supplies in now, right? So as I am talking to this woman about putting her family members back in the ground, I look over her shoulder and a group of people have come in on four-wheelers and are just taking pictures. They're like, oh, look at that. Look at, like, I've never seen a flood before. And they pull up and they take some pictures and they drive away. And that brings me to a whole nother thing. And that is the wonderful world of disaster tourism. So I want to make it clear. I understand that there is a thin line between like what I am doing and what I'm describing. I don't think there is an exact like litmus test you can give people to determine if they have good intentions or not, right? I think it's just a matter of if they pass the sniff test. Everything that I was doing to kind of defend myself a little bit was in the process of doing something useful, of bringing people supplies, of walking around, taking notes of what people need, and then documenting the area around it because I thought it would be, you know, useful to get the information. And eventually I had this idea in mind of trying to raise funds for it. I feel, at least I would defend, that is in stark contrast to people who want to see what a house floating down the river looks like. And I also don't want to be overly presumptuous, right? Maybe the group who was over there on the four-wheelers were taking pictures because they had like a legitimate GoFundMe, or maybe they were getting images because they were reporting back to, I don't know, some organization that was trying to survey the area. Who knows, right? But I know that at least everyone who wasn't going up there was legitimate, just from the sheer number of people that were there. By the end of the time I was up there, there would be like convoys of four-wheelers all over the place. And then we were still running into people who like hadn't been asked if they need water yet. On the last day I was there were police officers shutting off roadways in areas like Burnsville because too many people were trying to get into areas that road crews were attempting to clear. So even if you had supplies or were trying to make a delivery for someone, they couldn't tell the legitimate actors from the illegitimate actors. Because once it became easier to get to the region, people who were easygoing about getting there started doing that. I also want to clarify that doesn't mean that everyone who showed up after a couple weeks had negative intentions. There were plenty of people who came afterwards who have been a ton of help. And that's also not to say everyone that showed up early had positive intentions, because I also met some people who definitely were not that. Remember how I said at the aid station we were giving out gasoline to people who needed to get out of town, or, you know, just locals who were making supply runs and stuff? We had people show up to the aid station. This is in like the first 5-6 days of the event. We had people showing up with out-of-state license plates who initially you're like, okay, well, they're probably stuck in the area. We'll give them gas to move on. But they would keep coming back through every day and be like, hey, can you top off the gas tank? Which, like, no. Do you see what's happening? Look around. There were people who were just like showing up to check everything out, and they would come to an aid station and have the gas tank get filled up and just go on a joyride through the streets that were getting clear, I guess taking pictures, and then they would show back up at an aid station to get the tank filled. Like, what are you? We also met a lot of people coming in who only wanted to be doing the cool guy work, you know? Like, after a week and a half, we weren't going up mountains to try to see if, you know, grandma and grandpa needed medical evac or anything, right? Most of what we were doing is shoveling mud out of people's houses and delivering dog food. But there were people who did not want to do any of that. There were people who we asked, like, hey, could you help run this aid station? Or could you help this guy make a delivery? And they're like, no, I just want to go, like, save people. It's like, okay, you're about a week and a half too late. I mean, there's a lot of people who this is their moment, right? They get
Correct. And there's a lot of like big egos that I've seen too. Like, people will want to volunteer and help, and then it's like, okay, dude, we're gonna muck 4 foot of mud out of Meemaw's basement, and they're like, oh, I'm above that work.
Yeah,
like, if they're not, you know, jerking a baby out of a flooded double wide, they're not doing anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember even when I was there were a few people who, not to name names, but they were like upset to hear that they weren't going to be doing stuff like search and rescue or like going to houses and checking on people and stuff. It'd be like, hey, can you help run the aid station or like shovel mud out of the Dollar General? And they did not like that answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It looks good for social media, and it looks good and cool and high speed and operator to be whipping around in a helicopter and crap like that. But like that phase is long since past.
Also, around the time I was getting there, the first government aid started to show up. I mean, it had already showed up, like literal aid, like the helicopters, airdrops I mentioned. But I mean, groups like FEMA or the military began to show up in the region. And that is something I want to talk about, because online I have heard everything about government influence during the hurricane. I have heard everything from them trying to hide bodies or using the hurricane as an excuse to kill off parts of the country they don't like. I've heard people say that the government is using this as an opportunity to seize land and assets under like eminent domain or whatever. I've even seen people, elected officials included, saying that perhaps a weather machine is responsible for the hurricane. And while a lot of those more out there theories we can just simply lay to bed, some of the hate certainly comes from from somewhere. Now, it's not to say that the government workers are these mindless monsters who are looking to destroy people and reap the benefits, right? Every military member, every federal aid worker that I talked to was nothing but kind and welcoming.
We started working with the 27th Engineer Battalion, kind of working with them and helping them get set up and putting them where the work is. Really, like they were great to work with. They were willing to help people. They didn't have like all the equipment they necessarily needed, but they sure were willing to use what they had to make do.
However, the organization itself had some questionable decisions. Let's start with the military because that's easier. There were several like engineer groups that were deployed to the region with a lot of equipment, things to clear roads, things to pave new roads, and all of that help was fantastic. People needed routes opened up quickly and efficiently, and the military was getting that done. However, that is when they were actually allowed to help because, as anything with government, bureaucracy gets in the way. There were a couple instances of the aforementioned bad actors getting into trouble in disaster areas. For example, some groups saw people, not us specifically, I don't think, but some groups saw people holding rifles or open carrying handguns or something like that and decided to take it to the next level.
Walking around like with plate carriers and kit on and stuff like that. And it's like, dude, this is it's been like what, 7 or 8 weeks now since this happened.
You're
So, like,
a little late. Yeah.
I don't know. It's almost kind of funny, right? Like this, it seems LARPy almost. But there were certain organizations that were like they were well intended, but their execution of it was so incredibly poor that it was counterproductive, right?
Yeah.
Doing things like what some of these, we'll call them volunteer organizations, were doing in some of these areas may have been acceptable if you were conducting like combat operations in an actual combat environment.
If we were in a gunfight, yeah.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
If this was like an actual conventional or unconventional conflict, like pulling security in a patrol base, got it. Okay,
Yeah,
right.
sure.
No questions asked. Doing that up Pensacola, that is completely unnecessary and it's completely counterproductive. I would really struggle to see any justifiable reason to do anything remotely like that.
I did hear some stories, and again, I don't know how founded they are. I did hear some stories of certain groups like being at aid stations and stuff like that, and not only was everyone like, decked out like rolling deep, but they were also doing like security patrols through the woods and surrounding areas and stuff.
Absolutely unnecessary, and it was absolutely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
and-
insane. Yeah.
It is, and I don't think there's any reasonable justification for anything even remotely like that. I was running around like distributing food, water, and cash to people that I knew because I am from here. I'm not trespassing on someone else's property conducting a security patrol. Really, there were people here that were just straight up LARPing.
Which all of that's well and good if, you're being shot at, but maybe not so much when there's like scared families who don't know what they're going to eat. And on top of that, there were some instances of people just being generally unfriendly. Like, for example, a 44-year-old man over in Rutherford County apparently had seen one too many posts on Facebook about FEMA coming to drink their blood or whatever. So he took a rifle and apparently went to a FEMA aid station and threatened to shoot people. Despite that being one bad actor in one instant, again, bureaucracy, that caused the entire war machine to shut down for a while.
Engineers had a dozer, is a Cat D6, that they had staged in Marion, and the only way to get it up the mountain was to go around through 40, through Asheville, and then up through Mars Hill, on the 19. Their S2 gets some report that there is active militia activity in Yancey County that is holding up and threatening government vehicles. That turns into like, okay, now any government vehicle cannot cross Yancey County. There's a community that's in dire need of this dozer, right, to repair this road, and we can't get it across Yancey County because it's on lockdown. We talked to my contacts in the sheriff's department. We talked to the contacts in the state, the highway patrol, and they're like, dude, we have no idea where this report is coming from. Like, that happened one time, like up Double Island. Like we don't know where it's originating from.
Yeah. Groups like FEMA threatened to leave the area altogether, at least temporarily, until this dissatisfaction could be quelled. And on the one hand, that makes sense, right? You don't want to put your workers in a position where they could be in danger. However, when you shut down the aid to hundreds of thousands of people across part of the state just because one or two people acted out of line, seems a bit ridiculous, and kind of makes you see where a lot of the verbal hate started to come from. Now, that, of course, is no excuse for people online increasing paranoia to groups of people that are already afraid for their livelihood. There are so many posts on social media saying that FEMA is arresting people who come to them for aid, or that they're purposefully hiding dead bodies for some reason. There were also several people who claimed that the slow government response was because of government aid programs in other regions. And I understand having qualms with government spending, believe me. But as a general rule of thumb, I like to think that other suffering people are not our enemy. For one, disaster relief funding comes from its own budget. The only thing that would take away from the Hurricane Helene budget is if there were several other storms that required spending as well. Or I guess also like earthquakes or fires, or you get it, natural disasters. And as I said, I understand having problems with how the government budgets things as a whole before it gets to the spending portion of it. But it doesn't seem to me, at least, that spending was the problem with the government response. The problem with the government response was the government. Like anything else they do, the entire process was slow and bureaucratic. Like 3 weeks after the flood, FEMA was showing up to areas in downtown Spruce Pine asking people if they needed assistance. Areas that were completely taken care of like 2 or 3 days after the flood. What were they doing? Like,
that is a great question, Isaiah. And I would see them driving around and like knocking on people's doors, but it would be in like downtown Spruce Pine, bro. Like come on, dude.
I see.
You know
Okay,
what
so what was...
So to that point, the other side of that, like the inverse, the like volunteer FEMA people that I have worked with around here have been great, and really they are working as hard as they can, right?
Well, okay, so hold on. For one, you mentioned FEMA in spacesuits. Were they actually wearing the suits?
Dude, all right. So I say it like half joking. It straight up looks like almost like a NASA suit.
Were they in like a bubble? Were they in like a bio? That was their head inside of like a hood?
No, it was like blue cries, really, with like a little white FEMA, like.
Oh, you're saying it looked like the Air Force NASA like jumper suit, not the spaceman astronaut suit.
No, that would have been hilarious.
That's what I thought you were saying. I thought you were saying they were walking around in rebreathers.
FEMA has been doing a good job of like trying to get people to enroll. They are not quite the book that they have been made out to be.
And some of the stories about FEMA, like the stories of them stealing supplies, while not in itself true, do come from true events. FEMA began to reconcile aid stations, and because it is a government agency, it doesn't do that through please and thank you. It does it through telling people what to do, by seizing assets and then putting them in places that sure might be more logistically beneficial, but to the person who came to drop off supplies and then had them all seized by a government agency doesn't look too good. I've heard allegations of FEMA stealing supplies. Stealing may be a strong word. Relocating. What is that about?
So that happened, and it happened to us.
Oh.
And I think you were there when that occurred, but that did not sit very well. So we had a volunteer that was bringing in some supplies to us. They were going to bring us like, I think 10 chainsaws, but they were going to drop off some donations at a different donation station that had been privately run before they came to us, right? Well, they show up in their truck, a few hours late, and we're like, oh, dude, sick, you've got the chainsaws. And they're like, no, actually, the donation station I went to, or I had called yesterday, had been, consolidated, might be the word, by FEMA, and they just took everything off the truck. And that's not like hearsay. Like, I know that happened.
Wait,
right?
well, hold on. Are you saying that FEMA started running the aid station?
Yes. So FEMA was going to certain aid stations. Like we had someone come by our, I say our aid station. It's the house. It's my dad's house.
Yeah.
They worked at Avery County Humane Society or the animal shelter, and FEMA came to them and told them they had 24 hours to give all of their aid to a church or to consolidate with a FEMA aid station.
Well,
Yeah,
hold
yeah.
on. Okay, so what were they do? Okay, FEMA confiscates stuff. What do they do with the stuff then?
They would distribute it. They would take it and they would give it to another aid station, right? What they were trying to do, I won't say it makes sense, is understandable, is to consolidate some of the aid stations, right? I get it. But the way to do that is not to come in heavy-handed with some dudes in spacesuits and say, "Hey, you guys have 24 hours to pack this shit up."
So hold on.
That
The idea is FEMA's like, oh well, we know where stuff's needed. So
yes,
they just
correct.
are they seizing aid stations, like taking them over, or are they just setting up new ones? This is in the past, understood. Yeah.
They weren't like show up to your aid station like with a gun, put all your shit in the box truck, and no one gets hurt. Like it wasn't that
Yeah, but it
heavy-handed.
also sounds like they weren't asking that nicely.
I won't speculate as to how they took on management of it, like whether they were like, "Give us the aid station, no one gets hurt," or whether it was like, "Hey, would you like for us to take on this administrative burden for you?" I don't know how that exactly happened, but in 24 hours' time, the aid station went from being run by locals to run by FEMA, and that might have been because that aid station was being run out of the Humane Society, and that's like a local government building or something like that.
And
That was
maybe
run,
there's some level of like bureaucracy or technicality that hits. Sure.
and maybe I don't understand that. But what I do know, like actually straight up happened, like to us, is the chainsaws that we were supposed to get. We did not get
I mean, what
everything.
would happen if you just drove away? Do they arrest you? Like,
I doubt there's any like actual teeth to any of that. Like,
yeah,
you're
there's
not.
no
Yeah,
way. There's
yeah.
absolutely. Could you imagine? So
I,
basically, FEMA shows up and then they try to consolidate the local aid stations, which may have a nugget of good intention because it's like, oh, there's all these supplies in the area. We can put those in one place and distribute them easier. But as with anything else in the government, it's done through force and telling you where to pull your stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And instead of using like a ball peen hammer, they were whipping out like the 8-pound sledge, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is certainly a ball peen situation.
It is
Right.
This is undeniably a ball peen scenario for sure. That makes it. That explains where a lot of the rumors come from, but also where some of the rumors don't go. Because like you hear stuff online and it's way too out of left field, but this makes sense where some of that sparks out of. Yeah, sure. While the individual workers aren't evil or looking to hurt people, it's the government. What do you expect? And at the same time, I think everything that happened in the mountains should serve as a wake-up call to a lot of people. I have seen so many people say the government is evil, looking to arrest you and steal your supplies, and then in the same breath say the government should have been there immediately after the storm hit, fixing people's houses and figuring out what they need. Which, as someone who lives in the region and knows a lot of people that live in the region, if FEMA agents were in their house the day after the flood hit, I just, hypothetically, that would have been way worse. If you've ever been to a DMV before, just imagine that's how it is everywhere all the time. People who apply for aid through FEMA have to fill out applications and then wait a while and see if maybe their name comes up. And sure, aid being handed out is good, but it's not going to be enough to fix your house, fix your property, and feed your family.
I know people who have gotten like great financial assistance from FEMA. You know, they didn't maybe they didn't lose their home, but they sustained quite a bit of property damage. And I know people who have lost their house, right? Like an employee of mine lost his house and the property that his house sat on. Like it is literally gone. The land that he owned is gone. It is now like the river. He got, I think, $30,000 from insurance and got like 14 from FEMA.
14,000.
Yeah, but like what house are you going to buy?
I now have $44,000. This will fix everything. Yeah.
I'm saying that, and I might not be privy to all the details of the situation. Like maybe they're working on more FEMA aid for him or whatever. But like that is where, again, a lot of these rumors that get facilitated, or I say spread, not facilitated, they get spread. They have an ounce of truth to them. But like FEMA is not trying to gobble up all this land for lithium mines, right?
Most of the complaints I've seen about are from people not even in the region. When I was there talking to people, no one was complaining that the government wasn't doing enough. If anything, they were complaining that the government was doing too much. Sure, they're expected to fix the roads and infrastructure that we pay taxes for, but no one wanted federal agents at their house telling them what they were going to have for dinner. Mostly because, at least by the time I was there, their neighbor had already figured that out. I just don't think there is a scenario where the government shows up exactly where they're needed, when they're needed, and perform the way we want them to. I don't think that has ever happened once in all of history, and I don't expect it to start during a once-in-a-thousand-year flood. So I guess all of that to say, yes, I understand the frustration, but at the same time, I mean, what did we expect? And I really don't want to get bogged down in the negativity of it. I want to mention it just so that it's known. A lot of the reports that started coming out about bad actors in the region do have some legitimacy. But that was a blip on the radar compared to how many incredible people there were at every turn of this thing. Remember how I said, as I was talking to the couple who we dropped off the dog food to, how a group of four-wheelers came up and were taking pictures? Well, also while I was talking to them, 2 other groups came up, and these brought dog food as well and were asking if there was anything else they need. When we set off from the vehicle to start the hike to this little community, there was a man and woman who had an animal cage who said that they were going to places people had evacuated their houses and were trying to collect their pets to bring their pets back to them. So I was like, oh, cool. Are you guys from the area? And she tells me, no, I'm from New Jersey. This girl who was a vet tech from New Jersey just saw the damage, figured she could help, drove down, and started helping out. This is, I think, the most insane one. So at one point, we are driving down the road. We're doing our checkups, going to a few addresses we've been asked to check out. And we get to this one bend in the road where we see a couple of guys walking down. And they ask us if there's any help we need, which is funny because we're out here to do the same thing. So they're telling us that they're walking back to their area of operations, and we offer to give them a ride. We drive up to this massive bridge that somehow, despite all of the rubble laid up against it, did not go down over the course of the storm. I believe the name of the bridge is the Patrolman Lawrence Canup Jr. Bridge, if I recall right. So we get out there, and the entire bridge is covered in trees and brush that the bridge had successfully caught over the course of the storm. However, the guys we picked up tell us that on the other side of the bridge, there is a whole community that has been pretty self-sufficient over the course of the storm. They have a doctor there that has got medicine in for people. They have a church and a fire department that is trying to deliver food to people. And while I'm walking around on this bridge, there are dozens of guys with chainsaws and heavy equipment trying to clear off the bridge. That way, people from that isolated area can now get to, the outside world and hopefully get more supplies. So as I'm walking along the bridge, I ask one of the guys working with a chainsaw if he's local to the area because he's wearing a fireman's uniform, so I assume he is. And he tells me no, that he's with a crew out of Charlotte, which is like 3 hours away. And I ask how he got here, and he said him and his crew from the fire department, again, like 3 hours away, just drove up to see if anywhere needed help, saw the bridge, and started fixing it. On the other side of the bridge, where it connects over to the land, it had been totally destroyed and washed out by the storm. There were people with like small loader equipment trying to build a land bridge in order to get vehicles across. Like just in the middle of, I cannot stress to you how much this is in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those places that may only be a few miles, but it's like a 30-minute drive to get out to it, right? There is a crew of people from Charlotte, North Carolina, just working diligently to fix this bridge. Just one micro instance of a need being solved across a whole web of people solving needs in different ways everywhere. There was a water tank that had washed up on the bridge that someone had painted on the side of, "Hang in there." Again, I just like, I don't know any of those guys' names, right? They're people who in my daily life I would never cross paths with. And here we are in the middle of nowhere on this random bridge. They're working a lot harder than I was. They're working to try to get people taken care of and then just hang in there. Like a message to everyone. This is so cringe to say, but I don't think I've ever felt more united with my fellow man, with my fellow countryman, I guess. Gosh, that's so cringe to say. I've never felt more united as a people than I did over the course of this thing. There were places we would be hiking out to, and like a mile away from anything, we'd be in the woods, and then someone has set up an American flag with a bunch of bottles of water. Just if anyone's passing through the area, take what you need. It's a shame that it takes a disaster like that to bring people that close together. But at the same time, it's a great reminder that that kind of camaraderie is always there when we need it.
I've heard people saying stuff like, hey, we want to come like help fix the water system.
Yes.
It's like, oh, who are you with? It's like, oh, we're just a company. Like,
Yeah, just people who have, all of our roads are clear because of locals who have excavators, tractors, backhoes, track hoes, whatever they have, they're pulling together. That's how these roads got clear before, really just yesterday, I think the state was trying to start working on the bridge, but it's also private companies up the road.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't sit around and wait for somebody to show up. Like, and I know that's how mountain people are. Like, they're going to try to figure it out, and they're going to pull together.
You mentioned that, was it Elizabeth University?
Elizabeth City State University.
They donated which part again?
They donated the Starlink, so we're able to have Wi-Fi communications out here. We're able to beam up some of the data we collect as we go through and do scouting reports, and that's been a huge help, so appreciate it. We were donated a box truck full of supplies. The box truck was donated by Modern Metalworks out of Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina. The supplies were donated by the National Guard Association and the United States Veterans Corps. The drone you see behind me, the M30T, which is one of the most critical pieces of equipment we can use out here during these types of operations, was donated by the city of Washington for us to use it during these operations.
And there's still a lot of people who are very prideful who don't even want to take food and water because they want other people to have it when they really actually need it.
I've heard a couple cases already of people who were in dire straits saying, no, give that
give it to
someone
my
else.
neighbor.
I can go another day or two.
Yeah, and it's like, no, we have so much, just take it.
Yeah, like I think too, especially some of these guys are like cut off. They don't
are.
see what's happening outside,
They are.
and they assume everything's awful. But like looking at like the gym in there and stuff, the amount of giving is
It's
overwhelming.
incredible. It's so overwhelming. It's just, and that's all just people just giving their time, their money, their everything, and it's beautiful. Like, really, it's the only thing that's kept me going, like the hope of seeing all these people pull together, because for 2 days I sat and cried, and then I just couldn't do it anymore. And
You had a right to it, I think.
Yeah.
I think.
I still have my breakdowns. I had one yesterday, but I just have this peace that I know it's going to be okay. I don't know how. I don't know what a month from now looks like. I don't know what 6 months looks like, but I know that it will be okay.
We got this far, right?
Yeah.
With like tiny homes, right? There's people that drove all the way from I think it's Maryland. They drove all the way from Maryland, left at like 2 a.m. and just came and started driving around Yancey County looking for people that needed or had a lead on people that needed temporary housing. And they've got, I believe, 10 or 11 tiny homes built, and they're ready to bring them down, right? There's people that are really doing the right thing.
When people have a scope of how this kind of thing works, like disaster relief, aid, charity they can provide, people think of stuff like, oh, I can show up and deliver water. I can, maybe I can do some physical work on the ground. Maybe I can go cut some trees down or something. But it's pretty much collective consciousness that, well, it's not like I can fly in, but then you are just a guy with a plane who did that. And then other people with planes did that.
Followed along,
Yeah.
Now I wasn't the first one to bring supplies out in general, but over the past week actually, there's been thousands of general aviation flights from just regular pilots, people with airplanes, no relation to government or any prior disaster relief at all, just bringing as many things out. Last thing I saw, there's thousands of tons of supplies brought out by aircraft, just by regular dudes.
One thing about the Appalachians, everybody's, it is devastating. It's absolutely horrible what's happening here, but talk about a capable community that has come together to get things put back together and do things the right way, and really just stand up and show what Americans are really able to do. It's phenomenal.
I'm proud to be a part of this area. I'm proud of all the people who have volunteered time and money, and that's the one thing I know for me that's given me hope. And so it's just beautiful and amazing, and people don't realize how much hope it brings in such a devastating situation. So
That's beautiful. I appreciate that.
In the midst of all of this, I was so rejuvenated just to be proud of the people that I'm around. not far from there, I was driving with a group of guys. Again, we had a few more like food drops to make on our route. When we came across a small white steeple church called South Bend Free Will Baptist. And I've grown up in church my whole life. I've talked about that a lot. I'm a Christian. So obviously, Christian stuff kind of matters a bit, I guess, to me. So I step up to that church, and like the doors are broken open, and on the inside it is decimated. Everything's covered in mud. All of the pews are pushed up against the wall. The church not only flooded, but it suffered extreme damage. So I wasn't going to go into the church because that felt kind of disrespectful. So I was just standing outside of it taking pictures when all of a sudden a van pulls up next to me, and inside is the pastor of the church. It was then that I realized that it was a Sunday. I hadn't even thought about it because, we were running around doing stuff. But yeah, it was October the 6th, a Sunday, and I was standing outside of the church at like 10 a.m., right when the pastor got there. And I kid you not, this sounds like something out of a movie. The pastor had one leg, and he had a whole van set up to get him in and out of the vehicle with his one leg. And it was just me and him. The rest of the group I was with, they let me behind to take pictures while they dropped food off to a house that was right up the road. So it was just me and this one-legged pastor in the middle of what I'm sure used to be a beautiful area, but now just looked like an unfinished parking lot. And I'm talking to the pastor a bit about the damages the church had and everything. And he tells me, this is such a Southern thing. I ask him how he's getting through with all of it. And he looks at me and he says, "Son, if all you do is focus on the bad times, then bad times are all you're going to have." And he just had such a bright disposition about him. Funny enough, as congregation members started to pull up to the church, one of them rolled down his window while I was talking to the pastor, and he leaned out the window and said, "Pastor, next time you pray for rain, you better say how much." Which is the most Southern Baptist thing. Anyway, so the inside of the church is ruined. The ground's covered in mud. You can't have a service in there. So the members of the church that are there for Sunday morning service are just circling their cars out front and just having church in what I guess used to be the parking lot. So I asked the pastor if it's okay if I get some footage of the church, and he says, "Yeah, go inside, go wherever you want, doesn't matter." And he tells me that the water levels got all the way up to like the windows of the church and beyond, and that the basement of the church was completely flooded, like all the way to the top of the staircase was full of mud and water. But he said a couple days ago, some church out of Kentucky showed up with equipment and pumped all of the mud out of the basement to make sure the whole church didn't fall in. And I asked him what the name of the church was, and he says, "I don't know. They never gave us a name." Like, might as well be Angels, right? And it was like that everywhere I went. There were so many places I went where it's like a road's cleared, or there were places I went that there were signs that were like, "Stay at it, hang in there." Like everywhere I went, there were angels just fixing the way as you go. And I don't mean literal angels. I mean people that never cared to give their name, people who weren't in it for anything other than just helping someone else out. Every step of the way, people kept excelling past, I guess, whatever I thought we were capable of. So I'm standing here in this church. I walk in, and the floor's covered in mud. The inside's destroyed. And it reminded me of so many churches I'd been in growing up. All these little, like, small community churches don't have more than 10, 15 people. And I'm in, like, the remnants of one. But the church is still strong as ever. They're right outside the front door, singing hymns, starting up Sunday morning service. And behind the pulpit of the church, there's a painting of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it has the verse of what Jesus said in the garden painted on it as well, where he asked God, "If there be any other way, let this cup pass from me." And yeah, I cried in that church. I had seen so much, and I didn't even see that much compared to a lot of the guys. Like most of the dudes I was there with were like finding bodies and like, you know, seeing family members who just found out that they lost family members in the midst of everything. And I feel so unworthy to even say that I got emotional. I just saw, like, I remember being at the AIDS center and seeing a little girl who asked if we had any toys because she lost all of hers. And there, Sophia that I mentioned earlier was giving kids trick-or-treat bags because it was October, and the kids were running around putting deodorant and soap in trick-or-treat bags. And then I stood in that church and I felt ungrateful. My life has been one full of blessings, and I was standing around a lot of people who could really use some about now. And I made a promise to myself that if I was capable, I would try to do something. And I'll get to that in a minute, but that one-legged preacher, don't know what he did for me there. But that's kind of the running through line through this whole thing, right? A lot of people doing something far greater than themselves, without really stopping to get their name written on it, right? Just sticking with it. I've never been more proud to be a mountain boy. I'll tell you that. We did all right for a bunch of rednecks. Anyway, I spent a few days there and just got to see a little bit of what people were going through in the region. I met a lot of incredible people, and people I already knew proved themselves to be incredible. By the time I left, things were starting to switch pace. It went from people need food and people need gasoline to people need to know what they're going to do for work next week. Think about it. A lot of people lost their home. They lost their car. The land that the home was on is destroyed. You can't build anything on it. And they have no way to get to work if work even exists. According to FEMA, about 0.8% of houses in the region had any kind of flood insurance. And I mean, duh, your house is at like 1,200 feet elevation. Who on earth would think that it could be underwater? Some research groups in the area have estimated that this flood was a quite literal once in a 1,000-year event. So while sure it might be easy to judge and wonder how these people weren't more prepared for this scenario, most people don't think they can drown on a mountaintop. A lot of people I knew in the area were just paying out of pocket for people to get a place to stay or to do some immediate repairs to make their house livable again. And while that's great and certainly a show of love in a community, that's also not very sustainable, especially because a lot of the people who were giving money weren't exactly in the best position to give in the first place. When I left North Carolina, do you ever have that feeling when like you leave your wallet at home or you forgot your wedding ring somewhere? And you may not know specifically what yet, but you have the feeling in the back of your head that you're leaving something behind and you keep checking your pockets until you figure out what it was. I had that feeling the whole drive back. It was very evident to me that as a silly little YouTuber who makes dumb videos, there had to be something I could do, something that we could do.
I don't know exactly what Appalachia will look like another 20, 50, 100 years from now, right? But I know in some way it'll be okay. I mean, we've bounced back from worse. As I mentioned earlier, if we are always waiting for someone else to be a good Samaritan, we're going to run out of Samaritans pretty quick. After the flood, myself, as well as many of my friends, were financially secure. Our homes were secure. We were emotionally secure, right? But we saw a lot of people who weren't. I know that the mountains will be okay. I know that the community will make it, but I can't say that for everyone. Myself, as well as the people around me, saw the devastation that the hurricane had brought and figured we had to be able to do something. So this is that something. And I would like to introduce you to the Appalachian Rebuild Project. The Appalachian Rebuild Project, or ARP, was started by myself as well as many of my friends who live in the affected region. And the purpose of this nonprofit is to raise funds and then use them effectively where we see there's a need. Now, I made a 10-minute video on the second channel explaining all the specifics of how the charity works and what we're doing with it and where to follow. So I'm not going to rehash all those points. There will be a link in the description to the video explaining all of that if you want to check it out. And if you consider giving, I highly encourage you watch it first so you know what you're getting into.
Again, we have enough water bottles at this point, I think, to survive a couple more biblical floods. But the main need that we have now is financial. People whose houses and home was destroyed, and they don't really have a means of action. Our original idea was to put together some kind of charity or nonprofit, but none of us had any experience running a charity, and also I'm a YouTuber, so that's probably a bad idea. So we began to speak to Chris Lewis, the guy I interviewed from Vets to Drones that you saw earlier in this video, about if there was any means that we could put together a nonprofit. To which he said, why don't you just join our nonprofit? As in, like, why don't you get in on the 501c3 and we can just make a mission for Appalachia, and you just skip all the paperwork and hard part and can start, raising money for people. And we were like, oh, we can do that. So over the course of several conversations and meetings, we put together a group of people to try to do something to put money back into the pockets of those who need it right now. And this isn't to say that we are more legitimate than any other charity out there or that we don't trust other charities. It is just simply because we see people firsthand who need something and can't bear to tell them to go find help somewhere else when we have the means to make it happen. There have been fantastic charities in the area, groups like Samaritan's Purse that I have heard amazing things from. But the only reason any of this went as well as it did is because when someone fell down, the person standing next to them helped them back up. So we've got a lot of people down around us, so might as well start helping a few up.
Any funds received by the ARP will immediately go to needs in the Appalachian region as delegated by people who live there. As a matter of fact, you already know a few of the board members. We have myself, for one, as well as Tony, who you've heard over the course of this video, his sister Sophia, who runs all of the social media pages for the ARP, and Chris Lewis, the guy from Vets to Drones, who again made this whole thing possible. And because we have people on the ground, we can use the money effectively. Say we need to buy lumber or brick. Well, we can buy it from a local seller rather than outsourcing it. That way the money works twice. It works at getting us the materials we need and also gives a local business money, which puts more money back into the local economy that's already suffering. I also fully understand that the phrase YouTuber charity is a very bad word, and for good reason. Which is why I want to make it clear we have professionals from Vets to Drones who are familiar with running nonprofits, as well as several professional businessmen who are a part of this organization. And really my biggest contribution is this YouTube video. It is not a YouTuber charity, I am just a small part of it. And if you want to see exactly where your money's going, well, you can follow the ARP on social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and see real-time updates as to where your money went. I also want to make it very clear that we know money is hard to come by. Not everyone who wants to give is going to be able to give, and I completely understand. That's one of the reasons that, again, the sponsor from this video, as well as the ad revenue from this video, is going to be donated to the ARP. So if you do anything from buying this merch, to supporting the sponsor, to buying merch on the ARP's website, to watching this video, to sharing, liking, commenting, whatever, all of that cringe YouTuber stuff, any of that goes to the ARP and therefore goes to people who really need it. And to that effect, in whatever way you decide to support, monetarily, through merch, donations, or just watching this video, it's such a small, stupid word in comparison, but thank you so much. I watched a lot of people, friends of mine, like go broke during the first weeks of this thing, trying to just pay for people to get, a place to stay for the week. And already seeing the amount of outpouring of love from donations, from sharing to volunteers, everything. It's overwhelming. In droves, people show up with support, love, and encouragement, and the amount of good that we've seen done wouldn't be possible without you guys. So yes, it's a very dumb word, a dumb way to say something so big, but from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Links to everything will be in the description. Check it out at AppalachianRebuildProject.org if you're interested. And again, the one time I'll do it, all the cringe, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. I hate, oh man, that, I've never done that before. That felt gross. But yeah, do that, I guess. Only because if this video does well, then it will monetarily do well, which will go into the pockets of people who need it. So that's the one time I'm willing to shill. Never again. But for real, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for sticking around this long as you have. And like I said, even if you're just watching the video to this point, then by cause of ad revenue, you've donated. So thank you. Thank you so much. It's weird to see it happen to home. But in the aftermath of it, I saw a camaraderie, I saw a bravery that I didn't think still existed, right? It's the kind of thing you hear stories about. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
Also, you mentioned you have a Facebook group, right? That
Just our
keeping
Facebook
stuff
page.
up?
Yeah, I put everything either on our Instagram and our Facebook. It's linked. It's just Mountain River Family Campground.
Mount River Family Campground.
Mhm.
Well, I'll have that linked in the description
Okay.
wherever this goes up,
That sounds
so
good.
people can access it, show support there.
Yeah.
And then from there, if there's any place you know in the future to
Okay.
donate or give her
Yeah.
stuff, like, you can find it there.
For
So,
sure. Thank
awesome.
you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it. Is there anywhere that the audience can find you, or any way that they can support you guys directly, or anything you want to shout out, by all means?
Absolutely. So we're Vets to Drones. You can reach us at vetstodrones.org. That's our website. Email me directly at chris@vetstodrones.org. We are a growing organization. We have over 2,000 veterans across the United States that we're looking to train this year, and we've trained over 200 in the past several years now, and looking forward to continue our mission and train more veterans to get out and do the great work we've been doing out here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Means a lot.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Isaiah.
it. Absolutely.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Anyone who's interested in what you're doing, is there anything you'd like to shout out? Anywhere people can support or follow you or stay up to date or anything like that?
Not really. I don't
Okay.
have any. I'm not on
Look
social
up
media.
at the sky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Look up at
see
the
if
sky
you're
and
there.
wave to me.
Yeah. If you see the plane,
Yeah, if you see the plane.
drive us a flash, just wave at it. Yeah.
But yeah, no, like I said, I am a flight instructor. So if you're interested in flying, just take a discovery flight somewhere.
Nice. Thank you very much for the
Not a
interview.
problem.
It means a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the outpouring, support for my community. Really, it's a blessing. Whether people have donated money, donated materials, donated their time, even just done something as simple as watch a video, right? I really can't put into words how grateful I am for everybody's help, right? And whether you're from here, whether you've never been here before in your life, if you have done anything to help us, through this situation, I really am eternally grateful. And these people are a blessing.
See so many people support just a few old rednecks, right? A few old
Yep.
hillbillies.
Yeah.
Goes a long way.
Yeah.
Formerly, to you, Tony, thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support. That's it.
And again, thank you all for watching. I'll quit rambling. Check out the links in the description. Show some love if you can. Thank you for the love you've already shown. We couldn't do it without you. So, above all else, keep Appalachia in your thoughts and prayers. And stay tuned on all the socials to see where they go from here. Like I said, I don't know what it'll look like, but I know we'll be okay. So, thank you all for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Also, this is admittedly less important, but because, the ground flooded, every Hornet and Yellow Jacket in the state was out, and they were all very angry the whole time. So everyone got stung a lot. Oh yeah, happy Thanksgiving.